Welcome back, space friends! In part 1 we compared the weapons in 4 universes. The link to the video can be found in the description or at the end of this video. We compared weapon destructive power, range and accuracy using material from the new Battlestar Galactica, The Expanse, Babylon 5 and Stargate SG-1, and now we will continue on to Star Trek and Star Wars. But before getting started, I want to thank our newest Patreon supporters, Park Maxwell and Sean Weatherman. YouTube videos and ad revenue can be a finicky thing, but when I reach the current Patreon goals, I'm going to be able to upgrade my obsolete hardware, software, and maybe even buy a camera so I can do super chats someday. I'm confident that the goal will be reached, so steady as she goes. Thanks so much for your comments in the last video. Clearly I have a very intelligent audience, and I should make some corrections and addendums. I lumped the weapons of Battlestar Galactica and The Expanse together, assuming they were using similar technology. In The Expanse we saw the use of railguns quite a bit, so I assumed these were railguns in Battlestar Galactica, but they aren't. They seem to be using conventional incendiary explosives to lob these projectiles, which aren't fast moving, making them less than accurate for long range. Also, I declared that nuclear missiles weren't accurate, but missiles in general really can be very accurate in space, as seen in The Expanse. I factored into their accuracy the fact that they can be shot down, and I also thought that nuclear missiles are generally going to be larger than conventional missiles, and therefore less maneuverable. But then again, perhaps not. Also keep in mind that I'm aware that there are a lot more weapons than what I cover here, but I feel it's most time efficient to talk about the most commonly used weapons. If you want me to talk about other weapons in the future, say so in the comments, and subscribe so that you can watch out for polls about future videos. And now on to Star Trek. Star Trek can get rather complicated. It's not easy to find accurate or consistent stats on a lot of weapons, but let's start with the Federation torpedoes in the 24th century, specifically photon torpedoes and quantum torpedoes. Photon torpedoes use matter-antimatter warheads, which means they impact with the annihilation of matter and antimatter, and release a lot of radiation, plasma, and heat. The Next Generation Tech Manual states that each photon torpedo carries 1.5 kilograms of antimatter. This is equivalent to 64 megatons of destructive power, a bit higher than the biggest nukes on Earth. However, torpedo explosive yield can be adjusted up or down fairly easily, and when impacting at short range, they can potentially destroy the attacking ship. While I don't think these are powerful as some of the strongest weapons we saw on Stargate, we can be sure they're stronger than most nuclear weapons, with the potentially to be many magnitudes stronger depending on how much antimatter is available. But even nuclear weapons can potentially damage a starship, as seen in Star Trek The Old Series episode Balance of Terror. But the delivery system of photon and quantum torpedoes is rather cool. It's a capsule that can sustain its own warp speed and propelled with an antimatter engine. This means its range is as far as 3.5 million kilometers, but the effective tactical range is 750,000 kilometers, which is still pretty good all things considered. The quantum torpedo uses a different type of warhead, but they're said to be about twice as powerful as a photon torpedo. Since these are torpedoes, and even though they do have their own guidance system to hone in on targets, they're not going to be as accurate as some other weapons. I'll rate their accuracy as fair, and their range as excellent. Moving on to phasers. The power output of phasers according to the tech manual is not that impressive. Since today we have 10 petawatt lasers, that kind of leads me to believe that they kind of messed up in the tech manual, or that phaser destructive power is not really about the heat. Phasers are not lasers, and they're not just a beam of light. They're a particle beam using something called nadions, which strip subatomic particles apart and free the strong nuclear force. This means it's going to effectively disintegrate any kind of matter it comes into contact with. One fun way to gauge phaser power is to take a look at this turbolaser shot on Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back. The Star Destroyer pretty much disintegrates the asteroid. Can a phaser do the same? Oh, you bet. It can blast craters in the hull of a Borg cube, and I guarantee you that Borg cube is made of stronger stuff than even an asteroid made of iron. I believe phasers are comparable to photon torpedoes in destructive power. Perhaps since they're a particle beam, their power dissipates over range, but the effective range of phasers by the Next Generation era is 300,000 kilometers, which is pretty good. Their accuracy is quite excellent, at least on Galaxy-class starships and other TNG ships. Phasers are placed in strips, which means they can emit a beam in virtually any direction, and they can split up the beam and hit multiple targets. They can target and destroy Ferengi missiles in flight. They can deal with smaller fighter-sized targets with ease. All of this, of course, depends on a good sensor lock. Phasers are capable of missing against stealthy ships, or when sensors are hampered. I'll rate phaser accuracy as excellent. There are many other weapon types in Star Trek, such as disruptors, plasma torpedoes, and others, but all are comparable in power to Starfleet weapons. But in the interest of time, we're going to move on to Star Wars. First, I need to clear something up right away, and I made a whole video about this. Star Wars lasers are not lasers, not in the way that we know them. And any geek that's worth his salt should know that by now, otherwise you might as well turn in your nerd card and walk away in shame. No, I'm just kidding, don't do that. Don't walk away with shame. You can be taught. They're only called lasers because apparently they use a laser to energize the bolts of energy coming out of these turrets. These bolts are composed of highly ionized gas called Tabana gas, compressed and accelerated out of a barrel. Sound familiar? Yep, Star Wars lasers are closer to plasma weapons than anything. And as plasma weapons, they're limited in range, and in Star Wars, severely limited. But the power of these weapons is not to be scoffed at all, like some of you Trekkies might try to do. Coming back to this asteroid in The Empire Strikes Back, we can accurately calculate the destructive power of the turbolaser bolt. This has been analyzed to death on the internet, but StarDestroyer.net has calculated that this would take about 250 terajoules of heat energy to vaporize this iron asteroid. Now that sounds like a lot, doesn't it? Well, not really. I mean, the lasers we have here are already at 10 petajoules, which is about 40 times the required heat energy to vaporize that iron asteroid. Now, I might be missing something here. Maybe the area of effect of our lasers is minuscule compared to the area of effect of a turbolaser bolt. So I'm going to give Star Wars a little bit of credit. Now hopefully I'm not being biased since it's Star Wars, but perhaps that's the factor I'm missing. Feel free to chime in the comments. But I think the energy output of each turbolaser bolt is nuclear in yield. Maybe not Tsar Bomba level, but several times the Hiroshima level. And they can be fired every couple of seconds for an indefinite period of time. Perhaps the power of each turbolaser bolt is a fraction of a photon torpedo. This is why I'm going to put Star Wars lasers right out there with some of the strongest plasma weapons in sci-fi. Now, Star Wars lasers are only fair in accuracy. They fly in visible bolts, they're not on fast-moving emitters like phasers or lasers, and it's true that many Star Wars lasers are on point defense turrets, but they're still not 100% accurate, which would explain why fighters are used so prominently in Star Wars. And their range, well, we simply never see a Star Wars laser hitting anything outside of visual range. The range of these weapons is kind of embarrassing, to be honest. Although they should be able to bombard a planet from orbit. The range should be at least several dozen kilometers for capital ship weapons. Still, that's not very impressive. Star Wars lasers have poor range. And now for Star Wars torpedoes. It's universally understood that proton torpedoes are nuclear weapons. They have shaped charges for hull penetration. The yield of these weapons is inconclusive, but based on their size, they're probably equivalent to a tactical fusion nuclear weapon. But it could be that there is some technology that greatly increases their yield. I'll give Star Wars credit and conclude that these are probably several times more powerful than Hiroshima bombs. Concussion missiles are portrayed in most Star Wars games as being anti-fighter weapons, with an explosive area of effect. After all, they are called concussion missiles. Torpedo implies a slower moving projectile with a large warhead, meant for destroying enemy ships. But both of these weapons have their own guidance system. They're fairly maneuverable, but they can be shot down. I suspect these weapons may differ from photon torpedoes in that they're not as tough. We know photon torpedoes have their own deflector shielding, and I don't think we've ever seen a photon torpedo being shot down with point defense. At any rate, we know that proton torpedoes and concussion missiles have a limited ability to home in on fighter-sized craft, so we're going to rate the Star Wars missile weapon accuracy as fair. I don't know what the range of these weapons are, and can't find any information on it. They're certainly much longer range than lasers, but there's no evidence to suggest that they run out of fuel anytime soon. I'll rate their range as good. In conclusion, as expected, conventional weapons and more hardcore sci-fi like The Expanse and Battlestar Galactica, while they do have pretty good damage applications, They're a bit less powerful than the energy weapons we see in Babylon 5, Stargate, Star Trek, and Star Wars. Say in the comments whether you agree with my conclusions or not. That's all I have for you today, folks. But we have a new project. I'd like your help with it. This is going to be fun. Through a series of polls, you guys are going to help me to design, build, and animate an original starship design. As of this recording, out of Star Trek, Star Wars, BSG, B5, and The Expanse, you all have chosen the Star Wars universe. By the time this video is out, the second poll will be done, which is choosing the faction. The choices were the New Republic, the Empire, the Chiss Ascendancy, which is Grand Admiral Thrawn's people, or independent, such as what you might see in Pirates, the Hutt Cartel, Bounty Hunters, etc. The next poll will be on Patreon, but it will be open to the public, so you don't have to be a patron to participate. The choices for this are Fighter, Bomber, Corvette, Frigate to Cruiser size, and Battleship or Star Destroyer size. Further polls will be conducted by patrons only on Patreon, so if you throw in $1, you'll be able to chime in and vote on the fine details of the design. Meanwhile, on Patreon, feel free to track the progress of this Winged Defender class Romulan ship, which I hope to have out in an animated presentation very soon. Thanks for watching, Space Friends. Until next time.